So our guest today is an incredibly impressive individual and is the first person on the podcast with a PhD. She was employee number 109 at Tesla Motors, which today has, I think, north of 120,000 employees around the world. And I would probably guess that considering her early contributions to that business, I can probably part thank her for being able to buy both our first and second Tesla. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to work together with this person, even though it was only for about a year, and I was based in Melbourne and she was based in Brisbane. But I find her incredibly good at her job, incredibly knowledgeable, really engaging with clients and colleagues, as simply someone you can trust. She has a lot of areas of expertise, but her doctorate looked at the influence of the purchasing experience for people looking to buy plug-in cars and how that experience influenced demand. I'm sure she's got a few interesting stories to tell us about that and a few other things today. It's my great pleasure to welcome to Charging Sessions, Alina Dini. G'day, Alina.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, and it's so nice to get together again.
Yeah, likewise. It's great. It's not often enough these days, but that's the tricky thing about being in different states in Australia.
Agree, but I think, so much has happened since we worked together that it's great to reconnect and touch on some of those things in the
Absolutely.
sector.
I was just thinking before, you have a really interesting career, obviously, in this space, whether it's in transport or in energy more generally. But before pursuing a career, what were some of the things that maybe really excited you as a kid? What were some of your dreams, and what kind of helped shape you as a person?
Well, I love that question. I think for me, I always really liked interacting with people. It was probably something that I learned from my parents. They taught me that every person mattered, and that no matter where you are in the world or what position you hold, that everyone has the same human basic needs and should be treated with respect. And so that was impressed upon me from an early age, and I think shaped the way that I interact with people and seek to make sure that voices are included when I do any kind of work. And I take that interpersonally, but also in terms of the way we shape policies and programs. So that's one important value that I think has always been a thread through my work. And another one is a theme of, I think, innovation and entrepreneurship. And this again comes from my childhood because my grandparents were immigrants, and they founded businesses in a small city that I grew up in upstate New York. And so as a child, I was always surrounded by the theme of having to sort of pave your own way and take risks and take on challenges that others might not be willing to do, and knowing that often you might not succeed, but you would learn a lot in the journey. And so we embody that, I think, in our family in a lot of different ways that we do things. But for me, it was, just an appetite toward innovation. And in our family, it led to an eventual relocation to Silicon Valley and participation in some of the most noteworthy startups throughout the family, but also, for myself. So that was
And
really
instead of
important.
interest, where were you before you went to Silicon Valley?
I grew up. Yeah, so I grew up in a small city in upstate New York called Rochester, New York. Rochester is best known for being the headquarters of Kodak. And Kodak, you may know, is an old company that was known for making cameras and film, and missed a beat in the digital era, and soon lost its market leadership as a result of that. And actually, our shift to Silicon Valley was very much driven by the downfall of Kodak, because my dad, who was employed at Kodak, lost his job as part of their downsizing, and forced my family to relocate because there were no other equivalent employers that utilized his skills.
Wow.
So we ended up moving. Incidentally, we moved to California because my aunt had founded a .com startup and was very successful. And she said, "Look, there's lots of jobs here. You can come stay with me for a while. We will have, we'll help you figure it out." So we did that.
Wow. That's super interesting, and really, like, it's such an emblem of like big industrial change too, like with Kodak, and both Kodak and Silicon Valley are kind of like those icons of industry, and obviously Tesla as well, right? And it's that we'll get to in a moment. Super interesting. I had a similar kind of background with entrepreneurial parents. My parents started a business almost, I think, 25, 30 years ago now, and a shoe business. And I think those things does teach you a lot as a kid, both in terms of, probably creating your own hunger to follow in those footsteps if you have good experiences with it. And I think, things like taking responsibility and kind of, learning some of the things that can be quite tricky in running a business too.
And one more that I think you'd probably resonate with as well, and that's resource efficiency. So I didn't ever realize until I became older, but my parents would do things like recycle plastic bags, and I don't mean shopping bags, but I mean like Ziploc bags, or we would look for the most economical way to undertake X project. And it was partly because we weren't very wealthy, but also because we had this mindset of resource efficiency.
Mm.
And so that has been a lesson for me in terms of managing my own life, but also it's shown through when I think about the work that I do now and how I care about helping people and managing resources more effectively and using innovative approaches to doing so. So that all kind of threads together into what I would consider to be, my professional vocation, I guess. And it really does come from my background. So thank you for reminding me of that. It makes me feel very appreciative of my family.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Can you tell us a little bit about how you, I guess maybe before you got into where you ended up working? I believe you worked for the state government of California for a while before going into Tesla. What did you do at uni your first time around before starting work?
Yeah, sure. So going through high school, I was very interested in policy and government. I really thought that government was the most effective way to make wholesale change. And I liked, I don't know, the West Wing, and I was really interested in history. So it made sense to me that I would study political science. And so that's what I majored in when I went to uni. But I suppose through that and through my personal experiences, which included volunteering in environmental organizations, I realized that I was wanting to have a focus in something to do with the environment. I thought I might be an environmental lawyer, but something about law school put me off. And I decided I wanted to work before undertaking graduate study. It was also around the time that Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth came out. So that was really impactful for me. And so I made a decision that environmental policy or something to do with reducing the risk of climate change would be a good start. And I managed to get an internship at a political office where the politician was quite focused on climate change mitigation. And so I raised my hand and said that was an area that I wanted to work on. And so I ended up getting some projects in that space, which was great. And actually that work in California at the time was very much focused on renewable energy generation and how it would be accounted for, and also emissions reductions from passenger transport. So incidentally, the work that I did there became a thread for me going forward in my life unexpectedly. But that's sort of where my focus came from.
Wow. Two things that come to mind just hearing that story. One, a question for you, talking about politics and TV series. What's your favorite kind of political TV series of, I guess, maybe the modern age, like let's call it the Netflix age and beyond? I've seen so many good over the years.
I know there's a lot of good ones. I have to be honest and say that one of my favorites, which is now finished, is Madam Secretary,
Oh,
because
yes.
I loved the idea of a female president, and was really sad when on various attempts the U.S. government has not been able to ascend to that level. And in Australia, we had a very short term, and unfortunately, wildly, I think, disrespected female prime minister. So would really love to see some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. Both on the choice. Madam Secretary is fantastic, and yes, it's, I think, clearly Australia wasn't mature enough to handle what I think was one of the best leaders that we've ever had. Certainly in the 15 years that I've been here, but let's hope that both Australia and the US is able to maybe mature over the years. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting looking back at, I think, in another 10 years or another 20 years from now, just that period of time, because I think Julia Gillard was an incredible leader in my eyes.
Agree.
Another series, sorry, we won't get stuck on TV series, but I thought it was just a fun thing. I mean, House of Cards obviously was another one. I think that was just
great.
amazing.
So well done. Absolutely. There's a few of them. We need another one though. Like it's time for some.
If you haven't seen The Diplomat, you should.
Oh, okay. I will put that on my list.
Very good. I think it's on Netflix. It follows, it's kind of similar in terms of content to Madame Secretary, but very, very cleverly done.
Wonderful.
Uh,
Okay, great. I'll put
yeah,
it on my list.
yeah, no, do it. The other thing I was just going to remark on too was you mentioned Al Gore and the Inconvenient Truth. Got a little bit of goosebumps when you mentioned it, because it was really one of those transformative things for me as well. In my, I was at uni at the time when, I don't think when it was released, but at the time that I really saw it and read it, and had quite a big impact on me. And I was studying business at the time, and I actually didn't really know what I wanted to study, so I went with business because it's kind of general. But then I saw that in the second year of uni, and I hadn't picked the major yet. And then I saw that, and then I introduced a major in sustainability, and all of a sudden it was just very, very clear, kind of the kind of impact that I wanted to have too on the world.
Oh, that's so great. And look, you did, you went through the climate reality training and have had that, furthering of that
Mm.
impactfulness
And you
through your
did
own
too, right?
experience.
You did
No,
that
I,
program.
I actually didn't. No, I
No,
didn't. I
okay.
wish that I had, but
Yeah,
I've heard only good things about it.
yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great experience. Yeah. So I've got a few questions here, sort of around your career that I'd love to hear about. So you work both obviously with sort of state government in the US, in California, but you also worked with I think the South Australian government and the Queensland government in different roles. What's your, I guess, reflection on what the biggest differences between those, I guess, apparatuses or governance systems or efficiency in being able to get things done?
Sure. It's interesting. I think in all of the cases where I have worked for government, the government parties that I have worked for have been wanting to boldly take a leadership position where they might have otherwise not been expected to. I mean, California is really well known now for having bold climate policy and often pioneering some of the measures that are taken on in other parts of the world long after they have first been introduced in California. So it was so incredible for even a short period of time to have been part of that narrative. And in my case, one of the things that was incredibly compelling and led me to do further work in terms of automotive emissions reduction was when I worked for the state controller. He sat on the board of the California pension funds, and the California pension funds had significant investment in the automotive sector, and they made a conditionality of their continued investment to put pressure on the automakers to reduce the emissions intensity of their vehicles. So
Mm,
basically to improve their fuel economy. So that was sort of where can we put pressure on industry to do more where there isn't necessarily a policy mechanism to do that. And then eventually, the Air Resources Boards strengthened its zero emission vehicle ratings, and the US introduced their emissions reduction policy for passenger transport. So it did come together in the end, but it was just that signal. And then in South Australia and Queensland, again, the signals were there. And so I think my impression is that state governments often have the opportunity to be really bold in their moves and force the hand of other governments to act. So it's just incredible to have been part of that journey in some of those cases. In
mm,
South Australia had its incredibly aggressive renewable energy target first about in the first renewable energy commissioner,
mm,
so a dedicated public servant to look after that objective, and he is the one that I reported into when I did my work there, and was just so impressed with the
mm,
commitment of his team and the commitment of the government to deliver that. In Queensland, similarly, with its Office of Climate Change back in 2009 and the ambitions around climate change mitigation, and in particular having an electric vehicle roadmap, which I was brought in to support
mm.
well before there were state government policies on EVs. So I was really happy to see that get up, and very sad when it got wound back.
Yeah, but is Queensland now back to a position where there is reasonably good
Yeah.
support for EVs, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, Queensland's done huge things since then, including introducing the Queensland Electric Superhighway, which
Mm,
was the first, and also now has the largest financial incentive for EV purchase in the
mm.
country with $6,000 available. So, yeah, they're really leaning in.
That's good. That's good. And I was going to get to this a bit later, but you were very much a bit of an EV pioneer in Australia. Personally speaking, you had probably one of the first few hundred, I would imagine, EVs in the country with a
Mm.
Mitsubishi IMEV, or
Yeah.
however you like to pronounce that.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I'm Eve is I think what we've said, but yes,
Yeah,
some version of that, my EV.
yeah, that's right. And more recently, you switched that over and now drive a Hyundai electric car, I think.
Yep,
Uh,
that's right. Mhm.
bit of a different kind of experience to that first Mitsubishi.
Such a shift in the technology. In between that, we've also had and still have a plug-in hybrid Outlander.
Mm,
So I've had a really good range of EV products and likely to be getting a new one in the new year. So yeah, I'm just so impressed by the evolution of the technology, which I don't
mm,
think is necessarily an Australian attributable to being in Australia, but just the sector in general.
mm,
And equally as a part of that, the public charging experience, because the iMove would have used the CHAdeMO DC fast charge plug.
yeah.
And obviously now we've moved to CCS type 2. So it's been interesting to see that transition occur as well, not just
Mm,
from the experience of charging in public, but
yeah.
also what it means in terms of the rate of charge and how quickly you can utilize the infrastructure to get where you need to go.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the naming of this podcast being charging sessions is kind of meant to sort of be that it's, it's a 20 to 30 minute conversation, and it's to kind of, you can listen to it while you're charging your car kind of thing.
Oh,
But
I love
mind
that.
you, the issue with that though is that obviously over time, as we get faster and faster charging, this can become quite a small and condensed podcast. But we'll see how we go.
Maybe. Hey, I've got a really quick anecdote I want to share with you. When we worked together at
Mm,
Verdia, I would often drive to the Gold Coast to meet with clients from Brisbane. And my day-to-day driver was my IME, which had about 100 to 120 kilometers range, probably on the Highway 100. So
mm,
I was unable to take that car to the Gold Coast because I couldn't do a return trip and there was nowhere for me to charge it quickly enough anywhere in public. So it's just interesting that I used to hire a petrol car on those days and take that car down to do my work in renewable energy.
wow.
And now I can drive my Hyundai easily to the Gold Coast and back in a single trip. But if I need to charge anywhere along the way or at the coast, super easy to do so. So how
Yeah.
funny that what's it been? I don't know, 7 years. That's the shift
Well,
that we've
yeah.
seen.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable, really. I've in that period of time gone from I might have bought my first electric car, or thinking about buying my first electric car back then. We now have our third electric car, but sounds a bit wasteful, but it's got to do with some of the improvements in cars and an issue with another car, etc. But yeah, I think I've also seen that even though I've had fairly long range electric cars, we're now live in Geelong, which is probably about the same distance as Brisbane to Gold Coast, perhaps to get to Melbourne. And yeah, we can drive that at least twice return, maybe even 3 times return, I think, on the range, which is fantastic. And you're right, I think that charging experience, even though it's getting a little bit of bad rap, across the industry and with some reliability issues and uptime, I think luckily we're going to start seeing some improvements on that stuff too. But it's, there's certainly charging is certainly not an issue if you're an EV user, in particular if you can charge at home.
Exactly. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's there and it's continually getting better. I think that's the key message.
Yeah. What on the, I guess more generally on the energy transition in Australia, clearly we've kind of had this interesting dynamic between the federal government and the state governments, and doing or not doing things to really support the energy transition. If you look back at, I guess, both over the last 18 months, the kind of change you've seen perhaps on a federal level, and then perhaps the last decade, or the wasted decade that I sometimes like to call it, in the energy transition, what's your reflection?
I think my reflection is that Australia's always had tremendous potential to be a leader in the energy transition and has demonstrated that the underpinnings of that are possible through some activity. So for example, the South Australian renewable energy target being met early and exceeded in many cases, or the fact that we have some of the highest rooftop solar penetration in the world, and also that we have achieved uh, more than, I can't remember the percentage, but an incredible step change in EV sales since electric vehicles have been made available at an affordable price point in Australia, and utilizing mechanisms that support consumer adoption of them. So by that I mean exemption from fringe benefits tax, etc. So there's quite a lot of potential here and willingness from people. Perhaps what's been missing is confidence. I think confidence in government that the decision to move in the direction of a low carbon future is a good one.
Hmm.
And we're seeing a shift, as you said, in the last 18 months, really toward that eventuality. And it's hard to say whether it relates to, time to reflect and take stock during the COVID period, or whether it's just that the commercials are lining up now that it means that it's a no-brainer to do things that we might not have done earlier, or perhaps just the maturity of the technology and the consumer confidence has reached a tipping point where it's expected globally, and
Mm,
therefore Australia must act. So I think a lot of these things have come together in terms of a confluence to shift the psyche. But we're seeing things like, for example, the new Premier in Queensland has just announced a 75% emissions reduction target by 2035 that will be legislated.
mm,
And that is saying we're prepared to do the hard work to get to that point, including tackling the most difficult to abate sectors. So it's really exciting to see the commitment, but equally, I think it's prescient because we're having the hottest year on record again,
mm.
and climate events all over the world that are obviously linked. So whether or not we're fast enough is really the question now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great point. Taking it just a bit of a step back, and I was keen to just pick your brain a little bit about what it was like to work at Tesla back in the day. You were early, very early in that journey, and it was probably, I would imagine, a pretty turbulent and really interesting time. Um, got anything interesting to share about that?
Yeah, for sure. Look,
Mm,
it was still the best experience of my life for lots of reasons,
mm,
personal and professional. It was so fun. And I think my takeaways are like, how incredible was it to have been there? And who would have known that it would be what it is now? So while there, were some bumps along the way, my takeaway is 100% positive.
mm,
I think, when I tell people that I sat next to Elon Musk for 2 years and, walked the halls of people who now have their own startups in the sector and are doing incredible things like, JB Straubel with Redwood Materials,
mm,
the guys at Range Electric. There's just so much that's come out of Tesla in terms of IP for more innovation that illustrates how much will and willpower and innovation inclination existed in that early group.
mm,
So I'm just really proud to have been part of it. And like in terms of things that were interesting, it was really, when I was there, which was between 2006 and 2008, very much a startup. We had a very basic premises. The vehicles, the Teslas that were available to drive, you would sort of queue up to be able to use them, to put kilometers on them and drive them around to test them.
mm.
People
And
had
this was just
sandwiches.
the Roadster at the time, with the Model S
Yeah.
being more of a brain child,
No,
perhaps.
there was a Model S prototype that
Yeah.
was in development when I was there and drivable, but
Mm,
very, very secret, as well as some of the other projects that are currently live. So it was this sort of thing too, where it was all hands on deck for almost every initiative that the company did. So whether it was, seeking to improve the range or get funding from the federal government, or, you know, increase sales through events and marketing.
mm,
You would often see engineers at marketing events on the weekends, and salespeople helping, as I said, to put kilometers on the cars or identify where there were issues. So it was just such a cool time. I really don't know how else to describe it other than just being fantastic. And yeah, there were some bumps along the way. In the end, I decided to leave mainly because I felt like I had done what I could where I was at the company, and I wanted
mm.
to further my education and sort of explore other options. So I don't really ever regret leaving, but because I just didn't feel like there was more for me to contribute in my capacity at that time. But yeah, I've only fond memories.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's what an interesting way to sort of start off, or early in your career, to be a part of. It's super cool.
Thank you.
Um, Now, looking at perhaps the more recent times, you're obviously now a really prolific figure in the advisory space here in Australia. Without going into any specific detail, do you have any really interesting or fun projects that you've been a part of, perhaps over the last year or 2 or 3 years? Maybe something that comes to mind.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, a lot of the work I do now is has been the same as what I've done in previous years, which is providing strategic advice to governments and companies who want to be part of the clean energy transition. And it sort of depends on where they fit in the value chain. But for me, it usually relates to innovative electrification technology intersecting with the human experience of using it, and how that assists with moving targets forward around emissions reduction. So in terms of like cool and exciting projects, I've been really fortunate to work with some of the proponents doing EV charging networks nationally and sort of setting up programs that increase access and connectivity to all Australians. Love the idea of EV road trips and you know, getting it to be sort of a lifestyle shift for people who are taking them on board. So that's been really cool. Equally, starting to look at some of those harder to abate transport sectors. So moving away from passenger cars into even light duty trucks, which are coming and we really need, but up the value chain to delivery vehicles and logistics has been really, really interesting to see what those challenges are, both from vehicle procurement and use as well as charging. And then I think lastly, that customer element is really important when it relates to consumer energy resources and the integration of the grid and what it means for the home. So while we'll have a cohort of people who are really keen to be interacting with the grid in a bidirectional way, beyond them sort of sending or feeding in solar from their house, perhaps using some of the energy stored in their battery or in their EV to offer back to the grid, there is still risk there and perhaps some question around what the commercial arrangements are. So really keen to support improving understanding of consumer behavior and risk and how we manage that in an expensive but really important energy transition, and making sure that there are options. So that really relates to enabling the market, removing regulatory barriers and improving the infrastructure so that that kind of exchange can occur for those who want to participate in that way. And I'll just say finally, like, we have now a government that is very committed to investing in large scale renewable energy solutions and committing commercial and policy targets to that end. But I do still think that we will see a departure in the communities from wanting to be only involved in the large scale solutions. So sort of more centralized and localized things like community batteries and renewable energy zones and participation in virtual power plants or even going off grid. We'll continue to see more of that. I mean, might necessitate that communities move in that direction to adapt to what is likely to be an uncertain future in terms of the resilience of the grid going forward with some of the climate events that are expected.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to reflect on that, the different scales of change that are happening throughout the grid and throughout society. You're right, it's kind of like, there's obviously a lot of focus and emphasis being put on big transmission projects at the moment to support very, very large scale renewables being deployed across the country. But it is just like with anything in life, having diversity in the way in which energy is generated, diversity both in terms of the technology type to generate the electricity and, also in terms of the scale at which you can do it. I mean, Australia's done an incredible job with the amount of rooftop solar we have, and it would be great to hopefully see more and continued support for consumers wanting to get home batteries and having those assets play a key role in the future too.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were talking a little bit about. I used to have a final question for you here, and I think I might have already heard the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you see as some of the most exciting developments in the energy or e-mobility transition over the next few years?
I think I mentioned already, I'm really excited about the arrival of multiple light duty utes or trucks in Australia and what that might mean in terms of a step change for the market, because I have encountered literally, I think, hundreds of people who I have spoken to about wanting an EV, but wanting the right one for their family. And I think having something that enables all-wheel drive off-roading at an affordable price that makes an average Australian who has one of those vehicles like they're not compromising in shifting to an electric solution, it's just going to be a game changer, and I'm so excited to see what it does. And I think there will be a trickle effect from that step change in adoption as it relates to the use of consumer energy resources, because we know from our research and experience that the EV and the residential based use of energy technologies like solar and battery and even energy efficiency go together really nicely. So it will be so cool to see how that eventuates. I'm really excited also about the potential for vehicle to grid. I know that it's it's not necessarily the panacea for distributed storage, but it certainly unlocks a new financial mechanism that would support the benefits of an EV for those who are interested in it. And lastly, I'm really excited to see so much momentum in Australia around circular thinking of and for end of use batteries in particular, but also all of this equipment. Like we are not solving the problem of emissions reduction if we're not thinking about designing materials for reuse and regenerating nature where we are taking from it, and also just being able to repurpose materials once we've utilized them. So moving away from non-virgin resources is an exciting trend that is essential, but I'd love to see more of in the new year, and I think that will happen.
Yeah. Fantastic to have you on the show. Really
Thank you.
appreciate your time and really, really great catching up. Thanks,
Yeah,
Alina.
likewise. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to connect. I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.